When producers create a movie, they obviously do so with the goal of making it a successful project, but unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes projects fail, and these failures are often unexpected. Failure isn't the same for everyone, though, because while you might like a movie, the majority of people may not. This is what we'll be analyzing in this video, as the movies on this list are projects that failed because most people labeled them as terrible. For this list, I'm only going to include movies that almost everyone is familiar with or that you might know the main characters from, since there are too many 3D animated movies released every day, and many of them flop. If you haven't seen any of these movies, I suggest you watch them at your own risk, as you'll probably get bored quickly. Number 10, Cars 2. Despite the success of the first and third movies, Cars 2 was a terrible failure. This film tried to give more prominence to Mater, and that probably changed the essence of the story. We must admit that Mater is an excellent character, but that doesn't mean he should be the main one, as secondary characters sometimes only work well in supporting roles. Luckily, all those mistakes were fixed in the third movie, and the Cars franchise managed to bounce back. Number 9, Planes. This is one of those movies I personally liked, but we must admit that most people hated it. The only logical explanation I can offer is that maybe people didn't like how unoriginal it was, since Planes is set in the same universe as Cars. That makes it feel like we're seeing almost the same thing we saw in Cars, but with Planes, which doesn't offer much originality. The storyline is also pretty similar, as it's about a plane that wants to compete and be the fastest, basically the same goal as the main character in Cars. Number 8, Chicken Little. This movie has some positive aspects, but unfortunately, the story is so simple that it made us feel like we were wasting our time. On top of that, the plot is very similar to old folktales, so there isn't much originality. This movie might work as a TV series for a younger audience, but making it into a feature film may have been too ambitious. While there are moments when we can enjoy the movie, it's still one of the most criticized by audiences. Number 7, The Angry Birds Movie. For those living under a rock and unfamiliar with these birds, I can tell you that these characters come from a mobile game that almost everyone used to have on their phones, though nobody plays it anymore. At the time the movie was made, there were still many people playing the game, but that doesn't mean it was a good idea to turn it into a film. I do want to mention something positive about this project. The design and animation were spectacular. But despite that effort, it wasn't enough, because the most important thing in a movie is the story, and here they gave us the same storyline we'd already seen in the game. Number 6, Shark Tale. This fish is one of the weirdest characters you'll see in an animated movie, but it's weird in a negative way. The fish's face looks too much like a human, and that makes it very odd. Even more strange is the fact that the voice actors behind these characters are amazing, yet the audience still didn't like the movie. Many people even called it one of DreamWorks' worst movies, and others said it was one of the worst animated films in history. Obviously, that's not true, because at number 1 on this list, you'll learn about the actual worst animated movie ever, and I think we can all agree on it. Number 5, Star Wars, The Clone Wars. First off, I'm a Star Wars fan, so fellow fans of the franchise can't criticize me for including this movie on the list. Let's talk about something positive. The visual design of this movie was excellent, as they used a very different style from what most companies typically use. This design style is perfect for the Star Wars universe, but unfortunately, movies aren't made just for the fans of a franchise. The main criticism from reviewers was that the movie is hard to follow unless you've seen a lot of other Star Wars material to piece the story together. Number 4, Ice Age, Collision Course. The Ice Age franchise started off great, with an original concept and well-developed characters. But this movie is a classic case of trying to milk a franchise because the first and second movies were so good. To give you some context, Ice Age, Collision Course is the 5th movie in the franchise, and basically the last one with the full group, as the 6th movie focuses only on Buck. The producers drained everything they could and tried to recreate the success of the first movie, but by then, fans were tired of these characters. Number 3, The Emoji Movie. We all use emojis at some point in our lives, as they've become a special kind of language. After all, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But despite the popularity of these little icons, that doesn't mean you can make a movie about them and expect it to succeed. It was honestly a pretty absurd idea, and while you might enjoy this film if you're into that kind of thing, the truth is, it's still a pretty boring movie. Some people said they hated it so much they couldn't even finish watching it, leaving the theater halfway through. Others mentioned that, despite its bright colors, the storyline was just silly and over the top. Number 2, Saving Bikini Bottom, the Sandy Cheeks movie. I think we all know SpongeBob and are aware of the success he's had. We also know many of the characters from the show, but that doesn't mean you can just make a movie about some of them. Let's be honest, a lot of SpongeBob's supporting characters are great, but what made this franchise successful was its main character. In Saving Bikini Bottom, Sandy is the main character, and that was one of the reasons this project failed. On top of that, sometimes it's just not a good idea to turn 2D characters into 3D, as they often lose their magic. Number 1, Megamind 2. The real name of this movie is Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate, but we're all going to know it as Megamind 2 because it's the sequel to Megamind. This is the worst disaster we've ever seen in a 3D animated movie, and the failure started right with the title. The name is too long, the animation is terrible, the story is boring, and the whole project feels like a low-budget TV show. The first Megamind was one of my favorite movies, so I had high hopes that Megamind 2 would be just as good, but it was the biggest disappointment of my life. Watching this movie is the worst kind of suffering imaginable, and honestly, I wish it had never existed. Megamind 2 tarnished the excellence of the first film, and now we all have to live with the fact that the Megamind franchise ended in disaster. If you haven't seen any of these movies, let me know in the comments, like this video and subscribe to Wizard Multiverse.